Yeah.
So, shall we start now?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Gandhi.
Yeah. Welcome to the panel discussion of the Dravidian Professionals Forum. Our topic of discussion is Hindu nationalism and rise of majoritarian democracy. India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. The preamble of the Constitution of the Union declares India as a sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic republic. The framers of the Constitution recognized diversity as a fundamental component of the idea of the Union, with multi-religious, multilingual, multicultural as fundamental characteristics. However, the right-wing forces which advocate ideology believes that India is the land of Hindus and any other religion should be subservient to the Hindu religion. The leaders even cited failure of some of the secular countries, stating that secularism gives rise to difference in opinion and beliefs and hence the failure. Indian constitution is strikingly different. Article 25 is a classic example which guarantees freedom of conscience, the freedom to profess, practice and propagate religion to all citizens. The article is carefully drafted in such a way that freedom to conscience is recognized first, even before the freedom of religion. Freedom of conscience includes freedom not to believe in a particular religion, not to believe in any particular practice, and not to believe in any particular God or even the existence of God per se. Thus, atheism and agnosticism is also recognized and given equal status with that of a belief in a religion. However, the rise of Hindu nationalism in the recent past seems to upset these constitutional and moral values. Institutions, agencies of the government, policies are packed with individuals or systems adhering to Hindu values in an attempt to put religion above the constitution, leading to the erosion of secular and democratic principles. Particularly, when Hindu customary practices stratifies its own followers on the basis of birth, which is inherently discriminatory, the damage to the constitutional moral values are still worse. We have also witnessed the failure of nation states like Afghanistan, Turkey, where religious nationalism took over center stage, where ideologies drifted from issues and ideologies became sacred or holy that crushed diversity. The learned panelists will elaborate more on the subject. We have our Honorable Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, Dr. P.T.R. Palanivel Thiagarajan, Professor Christophe Jeffrele, Research Director, Sciences Po Paris, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, veteran diplomat, former Union Minister, and acclaimed author, all stalwarts in this field and doesn't require any introduction. Next, I would like to invite our Honorable Member of Parliament, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the Chairman of All India Professional Congress, to address the event. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gandhi. Let me say what a pleasure it is to be with two good friends on this very interesting panel on an extremely vital subject, Hindu nationalism and majoritarian democracy, which is the reality that has dawned upon us in the last half a dozen years in this country. And I do want to congratulate both PTR and Christophe Jeffrele for their remarks, because they have spoken very cogently of many of the key aspects. Like Christophe, I too have a book to plug, my book, The Battle of Belonging, which came out a few months earlier. In fact, it was more like November of last year. So it's now much older than Christophe's book, addressed exactly this topic of nationalism and majoritarian democracy. It was a little more conceptual. For the first 2/3, I was looking at the idea of nationalism globally, as well as the idea of nationalism in the Indian context, our freedom struggle, as well as the nationalism enshrined in our constitution. Now, I'd like to spend a few minutes on the conceptual issues, and then very happy to participate in a discussion where we can go into more specifically topical matters. I also want to say briefly how pleased I am to be addressing this gathering of the Dravidian Professionals Forum, because although your group's focus is on promoting Dravidian ideology in particular, it operates very much like the All India Professionals Congress that I happen to chair nationally. And so I feel right at home looking at the important issues facing our nation through the minds and ears of experts and professionals. That's what we are also all about. So good to see you. I wished you well when you were founded and established, and I'm very pleased to participate in your function. Now, the key subject at hand, of course, is nationalism. It's a deeply politically charged world. It's a panacea to some and a symbol of divisiveness and hatred to others. principally because it has been appropriated by those who misuse it. I'm a nationalist, but I advocate what I call civic nationalism, which involves a voluntary sense of belonging wrought by a feeling of inclusion, inclusivity in a national enterprise, anchored in an equal treatment in a constitution and institutions, not in religion, ethnicity, or other markers of identity that are immutable that come to you from birth. This is very much in direct opposition to ethno-religious nationalism, which is exclusionary and often dangerous and is rooted in an absolutist approach to determining who belongs to a country, who does not. This is a malignant form of nationalism that leads to situations like what our ruling party is promoting in India of exclusion and polarization. The Hindutva movement, as we all know, sees India as a Hindu Rashtra and is animated by the RSS famous slogan, Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. This exemplifies the kind of ethno-religious nationalism that I reject. And I've tried to explain this at great length in the Battle of Belonging, so I won't repeat all of that except to urge you all to go into it. I mean, I trace the two different ideas of nationalism in India very much to the nationalist movement, because the nationalist movement divided not on issues of North versus South or of ideology between Marxists and capitalists or anything like that. It divided on one simple question: should religion be the determinant of nationhood? And those who said their religion determined their national allegiance broke away and formed a country based on religion, Pakistan. And the rest, all the nationalist leaders you can think of and hail of that era, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, every one of them said, no, our freedom struggle has been for everyone. We will create a country that is for everyone. And the constitution they wrote over the next 3 years essentially enshrined the idea that anyone can be Indian, that it didn't matter what your language, religion, ethnicity, color of skin, culture, all of those were completely irrelevant. If you were Indian, a citizen of India, you had all the same rights. And that key idea is the idea of civic nationalism. And I would say patriotism is entirely acceptable to me, because patriotism is about loving your country because it's your own, because you feel you belong to it and that it belongs to you. It has nothing to do with claiming your country is perfect or the best in the world, nor with demanding absolute allegiance to your country without permitting any dissent. That is not genuine patriotism. That in A Battle of Belonging, I've written a sentence that some people have found controversial, where I said, a patriot is prepared to die for his country, but a nationalist is ready to kill for his state. And I think these are two very different concepts. In fact, if you go back to George Orwell's famous 1945 essay on nationalism, he talks about patriotism being devotion to a particular place and a particular way of life, which one believes to be the best in the world, but has no wish to force on other people. Patriotism, according to Orwell, was defensive both militarily and culturally, whereas nationalism is inseparable from the desire for power. The abiding purpose of every nationalist, Orwell wrote, is to secure more power and more prestige, not just for himself, but for the nation or the other unit in which he has chosen to sink his own individuality. And instead of Orwell, if you want an Indian example, there's Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore wrote about the idea of the nation as one of the most powerful anesthetics that man has invented. He says that it's under the influence of its fumes, I'm quoting Tagore here, the whole people can carry out its systematic program of the most virulent self-seeking without being in the least aware of its moral perversion, unquote. And personally, I am somewhat sympathetic to the Tagore-Orwell consensus that nationalism essentially lends itself to negative outcomes. There's a nuanced view well expressed by scholars like the American philosopher and historian Hans Kohn of German origin, who distinguishes between good and evil nationalism, with the nationalism of the Nazis typifying the latter. The positive kind of nationalism is as a constructive force, an ideology that builds a state, the nation state, and so organizes a community of people more efficiently and purposefully, promoting the cohesion of democratic institutions and values. The negative view sees it as malign, chauvinist, hostile, and power-hungry ideology that tends to subjugate and destroy. So my kind of nationalism, civic nationalism I'm talking about, embraces all. You can be a good Hindu, a good Tamilian, and a good Indian all at once. That's the kind of patriotism that I celebrate, because your identity markers, whether you're born in the Hindu faith, whether you're born as a Tamil speaker, whether you live in Tamil Nadu, all of that is not the basis on which your patriotism or nationalism is judged or forged. That is exclusionary, arbitrary, and can have horrific consequences, as the Government Citizenship Amendment Act has shown, because for the first time it introduces religion as a litmus test of who is an Indian and who is therefore the best sort of patriot or nationalist in their definition. Their idea of India is an absolutist one. A person has to meet their criteria to be seen as a good Indian. And the sort of secular constitution-based civic nationalism I avow wholeheartedly opposes this kind of view. In fact, when Professor Tharoor spoke about the increasing authoritarianism and the undermining of institutions we have seen in the last few years, that is a major theme of my book as well, because civic nationalism rests on democratic institutions protected by a democratic constitution. And that in these circumstances, Christoph had invited me to talk about Parliament, since he mentioned the judiciary and other institutions. This government has been attempting to reduce Parliament to a notice board. The notion of Parliament as the institution that ensures the accountability of government to the people at large, where the government takes questions and faces up to discussions, hears criticisms of its performance, and feels obliged to respond, that notion is increasingly being shattered by the attitude of this government, which is not interested in debate, which is not interested in accountability, that even on this recent Pegasus issue, we have seen an extraordinary development as recently as yesterday, when the committee I chair, the Information Technology Committee, had summoned the senior officials, the heads of department of the Ministry of Information and Technology, the Ministry of Telecoms, and the Ministry of Home Affairs on the recent Pegasus affair. And having confirmed their attendance 10 days ago, 1 hour before the meeting was to start, they all sent urgent emails expressing their inability to attend. And this is unprecedented in any democratic parliament in the world, certainly in India, that officials summoned to a parliamentary committee choose not to show up, despite not being excused by the chairman of the committee, that happens to be me. And that's where we have come to. There is an assault on basic parliamentary traditions and conventions that would be unimaginable in any other democracy. But this is part of what we're seeing today. You've talked on the topic about majoritarianism. Majoritarianism, of course, is part of the key mission of the sort of Hindutva project. But as I think was partly implied by what Professor Tharoor also said, this Hindutva majoritarianism is also tangled up with the idea of a populist leader in the shape of our present Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which is why I've used the term Moditva rather than Hindutva, because it is Hindutva with a personality cult grafted on top of it. And so though some people enjoy enthusiastically repeating the phrase majority community, and that is what explains the majoritarianism of India, I would say that this is misleading, because gender, caste, language, and much else besides puts any self-proclaimed member of a majority into a minority quite quickly. To reverse Michael Ignatieff's famous phrase, we are a land of belonging rather than of blood. So subnational identities, ethno-national identities have long existed, have long been exploited for political reasons. But this kind of totalizing Hindutva with this populist figure at the top, Moditva, this is a new phenomenon. And it's potentially a very, very major challenge to the idea of India that was enshrined in 1947 and above all in the Constitution of 1950. I'll try and wrap up by saying that I am concerned, obviously, by the petty prejudice that such politics often exploits. We've seen this since the Dravidian Professionals Forum obviously has a particular concern about the issue of some of the issues relating to the imposition of Hindutva on the southern states. I think that it's very important to appreciate the real danger of the ethno-nationalism of the majority. because the attempt to elevate Hindutva as a synonym for India's cultural and political ethos by claiming that a communal majority represents the whole nation is a fundamental assault on the kind of diversity that makes it possible for us to be self-respecting participants in the national project. It's very interesting that some have challenged my party and people like me. I've written a book called Why I'm a Hindu, and I'm accused of soft Hindutva. And I want to stress very clearly that Hinduism is not Hindutva. Hinduism is a religion. Hindutva is a political doctrine. Hinduism to me is inclusive and non-judgmental. Hindutva is rooted in the idea of political and social exclusion. So I'm not interested in a watered-down version of the BJP's political messaging. Like Rahul Gandhi, I want to make it explicitly clear that I may go to a temple or consider myself profoundly convinced by the philosophical verities of Hinduism. But I don't support any form of Hindutva, whether soft or hard. It's an anathema to my way of being, to my belief system. And as a congressman, I would tell you that religion is the personal concern of every individual. Hindutva, on the other hand, is a political doctrine that tries to interfere with individuals' rights to worship as they choose, tries to get into the bedroom, get into the kitchen, get into the dining table. That is not Hinduism at all. In many ways, Hindutva is an anti-Hindu ideology. And I would stress that Hinduism is inclusive of multiple ways of worship. Hindutva is indifferent to devotion and cares principally about identity. So Hinduism is open to reform and progress, which explains why it survived for 4,000 years. Hindutva is reactionary and regressive, with its roots in the racial pride ethos that spawned fascism in the 1920s. And that's why I think it's unlikely to outlast its current peak this century. But I will conclude by saying that therefore, even the term majority community, majoritarianism can be misleading. I suspect that if one really were to interrogate the majority of Hindus, they don't buy into this kind of notion. And there's a very interesting Pew Research Center study that came out, which I think all of us are still digesting, that suggests that most Hindus, most Muslims, most Christians believe respecting other faiths is central to their conception of their own faith. And that ultimately would be the saving grace, that Indians would not be so easily molded willingly into an ethnic nationalist majoritarian project. I'll stop there. Maybe my optimism is the optimism of a politician who hopes to reverse the tides, and Christoph's pessimism is that of the scholar who sees the mounting currents heading in one direction. But let's talk about it, and I hope PTR will pop back on the screen. He's disappeared from mine, so that he can also help steer this conversation. Thank you very much, and again, all the best to the Dravidian Professionals Forum.